So is it 4 to 8 amos or 8 to 16 amos? Amalei Abaye Rabbi Yosef. Abaye said, "Well, tiflag later of Nachman." Let's accept what Rav Nachman said, which Rabbi had quoted Rav Nachman, 8 to 16 amos. It's not Masnisin Kavase because there's a Mishnah like him. It's not, we have a Mishnah. Anotea as Karmo Sheshas Rayama or Sheshas Rayama. If you plant a vineyard, 16 amos square, not square, but 16 amos, like the rows of the vines are 16 amos apart, then you can actually plant wheat in or other grains in between. Now, as you know, in a vineyard, you can't plant wheat, that's kilayim, but you can plant in the next, if it's a separate plot, then you can plant wheat. So if the vines are 16 amos apart, then it's considered a separate field. Like it's not considered a vineyard in between, and you can plant wheat there. So Amar Yehuda, Maseh bet Salmon, it happened once in this place called Salmon. Ve'echad shenata as karmo sheshes real sheshes re'ama. Someone planted vines 16 amos apart. Vayahofech seyar shtei shuros v'tzad echad. He would turn the branches of every two adjacent rows towards each other. Vizareya senir, and he would plow he would plant wheat in the plowed area between the two rows. Lashana Cheres, in the following year, he would turn the branches of the vines the other way. Vizera es habor, and then he would plant seeds in the area that last year was covered by the vine. The vines had turned into each other, and
How
this year
much
he's planting.
space? Sorry, how much space could he use for the wheat? We've established that if there's a distance of 16 amot between the two rows of grapes, let's say, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So then if he plants wheat between them,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't 16. How much space can he use for wheat? Six amot, 8 amos there, because at some point there won't be 16 amot between the wheat and the and the grapes, right? How much space does he have to leave between them so it's not considered kalayim?
The answer is he doesn't have to leave any space because imagine that there weren't two rows. Let's say there was just one plot of land that is a vineyard, right? And then next to it is another plot of land. Can you plant wheat more or less up to the border of the vineyard? Yes, you can, right? So what we're saying is that if the vines are 16 amos apart, then the 16 amos in between them are not part of either vineyard, right? It's like
He doesn't have to leave any space. He can plant
exactly.
it's up to so it's not kalayim unless the wheat actually enters the field of the vineyard.
Right. But if the space between the vines is less than 16 amos, then that is part of the vineyard. So you can't plant any wheat in it, right?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Anyway, so this guy, one year he faces the vines towards each other, and then the following year he faces them the other way, and he plants what had been the previous year covered by vines, right? And the rabbi said that's okay. So because it was 16 amos, it's considered fine. Like it's not considered part of the vineyard. And so how does that apply to our case of the trees? That if the trees are 16 amos apart, it's like Rav Nachman says that if there's 16 amos, then that is beyond the remit of our Mishnah, right? So our Mishnah was saying that our Mishnah says there's a certain distance between the trees that they're considered to be like one big parcel of land, right? But if it's more than 16 amos, then it doesn't count. The Mishnah is not dealing with that, right? And that's supported by this Mishnah about the vines. Amalei, Rabbi Yosef says, I know about that. I know that there was a case Bedura Duravos, and there was a town of shepherds, also a comic Ravida. There was a case of this, three trees that were less than 8 amos apart, and they came to Rabbi Yehuda. And he said, "Zil have lay in well the Caleb. Give him enough land between the trees, even if it's very small, even if it's just large enough for two ox to pass through with their plow, right?" I didn't know what that meant. Like, how much space is that for two oxen and the plow? But then I heard about this brisa. You shouldn't plant a tree near the border of your field with your neighbor. Elohim Cain here who's meant 4 amos. You have to keep 4 amos away from the border. The Tani Allah, and we learned about that. Those 4 amos that, why is it 4 amos? That gives enough space for for working your vineyard without you can work up to the edge of your you can plant up to the edge of your yard without disturbing your neighbor's field, right? You have to leave a bit of a border so you can cultivate the vines. So I understood. That means that the measure, so there is a measure of 4 amos that's relevant. So that must be what he meant by saying, two oxen for 2 oxen to pass. And so, even though Rav Nachman had a good proof from the Mishnah, we see that in practice we don't rule that way. We rule that it's 4 to 8 amos. Rav Yosef Milotzanan. But don't we have a Mishnah that supports Rav Yosef? Which one? Rav Yosef again? The 4 to 8, right? But we have another Mishnah that supports that. Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon both say, if you plant your vineyard 8 amos apart, you can plant wheat there. So the source we had before said 16 amos. This source says 8 amos. So this is a good source to back up the 4 to 8 amos view. So, why didn't you quote that Mishnah to prove it to me? I feel like because the Gemara says because he'd rather use a practical case where we actually ruled one way or the other rather than bring a competing Mishnah. Which is an interesting thing. But I guess if you know that there are differing sources, then you go to practically, like, how do we paskin? Which and so you go to an actual case, and that indicates how we rule.
But this is supporting the 4 to 8 as well.
Yes, right.
Practical is 4 to 8, and this supports it. So it's just an additional support, right?
Right. So where I was saying, well, if you had a Mishnah that told you that implies 4 to 8 is correct, why didn't you just quote that Mishnah? Why are you quoting me case law? And the answer is case law is better. Especially, I guess I would add, especially when there's competing sources, then definitely you should go to case law, because how do you know that helps you determine which Mishnah was accepted as authority.
All right.
Bishlam or Rabbi Yosef. No, it's fine according to Rabbi Yosef, 4 to 8. I'll leave it to Rabbi Shimon. Shaminan le mefuzarim. So he holds like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon that 8 amos is the maximum. So Shaminan le mefuzarim. We know that Rabbi Shimon holds the maximum Shamina le Ritzufina, and we know the minimum, right? 4 to 8, right? Because remember, the Mishnah only said 8 amos is far enough. Is like, if it's 8 amos, then that's big enough to be considered second, right? So we know the maximum, and we know the minimum. How do we know? So the maximum we know, that's the Mishnah we just quoted. With 2 things, what about the minimum of 4 amos? It's not. We have another Mishnah. If a vineyard is planted with less than 4 amos between the vines, between the rows of vines, that's not considered a vineyard. The rows are too close together. So it's not considered like a whole field. It's considered, 2 rows of vines, but it's not a vineyard, as it were. Rabbi Shimon, the Chachamim Omrim Kerem, it is considered a vineyard. We're in the time Sayim Ki'ilu Einan, and you look at the any vines in between the 4 amos, like as if they're not there, right? So because planting things too close will not allow them to grow properly. So anything in between rows that are 4 amos away, if you have 2 amos between the rows, so the middle one, you're going to have to uproot that if you want the vineyard to be successful, if you want it to thrive. So we consider it not there. El Rav Nachman, according to Rav Nachman, that says 8 to 16 amos is the rule. Aliva Drabanan, and he goes with the not like Rameir and Rav Shimon of that Mishnah, but like the rabbis. Mufazari is Shaminat. So we know 8 amos is like the minimum, right? Ritzufi Nishaminat. I'm sorry, the
maximum.
The maximum. We know the maximum, but not the minimum. So Gemara Svara, who middle Rabbi Shimon Halga, since we know that Rabbi Shimon is the minimum is 4 and the maximum is 8. In other words, it's a factor of 2. So we will figure out Rabbi Nami Palga. So we know the rabbi's maximum is 16. So we'll go by a factor of 2 and we'll say their minimum is 8. Okay. Amar Rava says, Hilchas, the rule is, the ruling is, may Arbamas and Sheshesre. Guess what? It's a 4-to-1 ratio. The minimum is 4 for the tree. Going back to the trees, if the trees are less than 4 amos apart, then the land is not included, and more than 16 amos apart, the land is not included. But it's between 4 and 16 that our Mishnah rules that the land is included with the 3 trees.
It sounds like a pashara that they just combine the 2 shitas in a sense.
Okay, sure. Tanik Masidurapa, and we have some support for this 4 to 16. Kamayu Makorabin, Brisa says, how close should the 3 trees be so that the land is included? 4 amos. So Kamayu Makaking Sheshas, right? So here's a Brisa that says explicitly 4 to 16. So Hareza Konkarka, if it's between 4 and 16 amos apart, then the sale of the trees means the land in between them is sold as well. And also any trees that are between them, right? If I say those 3 big trees over there, and they're between 4 and 16 amos apart, and there are smaller trees among them, then the land is included, and the smaller trees are included as well. So what's the consequence of this? If the tree, like dried up or was cut down, the buyer still owns the land beneath it. But if the land in between the trees is less than 4 amos or more than 16 amos, then or you didn't buy the trees as a group. You say, on Monday you buy the first tree, on Tuesday you buy the second tree, on Wednesday you buy the third tree. That doesn't include the land in between. Nor the trees that are on the land in between those 3 trees. Therefore, if one of those trees fell down, you don't get the land. Okay, that's kind of obvious. Okay, by Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, Kishu moded, when you measure the distance between the trees, mimakom katsaru moded, or mimakom rachum moded. So consider like a tree trunk, right? At the bottom, it's wider, and as you go up the trunk becomes narrower, right? So do you measure from the edge of the trunk at ground level, or do you measure it from somewhere higher up, let's say chest level, right? Which would be a different measurement. Amalei Rav Gavia mi Beit Kasil, Rav Ashi. So Rav Gavia answered, Tashma. Here's a proof. It's not. We have a Mishnah. If you are measuring distance from a grafted vine, what does this mean? So, if you're the way I understand this is,
Well, the Rashbam says it's a young tree, a young vine grafted with an older vine.
Right, right. So the older part of the vine is thicker, and the younger part of the vine, the grafted part, is narrower. So same question, essentially, where do you measure from? The thicker part or the thinner part? And in Mondale Mikarasheni, the second, the smaller one. So you would say the same is true of the tree. You measure from, from the narrower part of the trunk. We're going to get more specific. By Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, what if you sell, like, sometimes you see a tree that has well, what if the tree is connected like underground, right? Like sometimes you see these weirdly shaped trunks that branch out and then go back into the ground. Imagine a case where the same tree, the trunk goes under the ground and then emerges a little further away.
Hmm.
So, and so what if those are sold as three trees, but really they're one tree, right? Mahos. Amrale Rav Gvia Mili Kasama Rashi. So Rav Gvia answered, Tashma, I'll prove it from Mishnah. It's not Hamavrich Yamogafani. If you bend over three vines, right? So what you're doing here is you take the head of the vine, you bend it over, you plant it in the ground, and then so it comes out of the ground again. So what you're doing is eventually it'll take root there where you've planted the head in the ground, and it'll take root, and then you can cut it off from the original vine, and you'll have a new vine, right? So if you do that to three vines, Vikareha Mirin, and you can see the roots at the point where they're buried. Rav Elazar Bar Mitzadok Omer, Rav Elazar says in Yeshme and the Arba Amos Yom Shemona, if there's 4 to 8 amos between them, mitzarfin, then they're considered two separate vines, and that becomes a vineyard. V'im mitzarfin, but if it's less space between them, then it's just part of the original vine, and you measure. If you're measuring, you measure from the original. So you would say the same thing about trees, right? The same rule would apply to trees. If they are 4 to 8 amos away, then it's then it's a separate tree, and if not, then they don't combine with the one.
Right, if it's 4 to 8 amos, they are combined, right?
Okay,
That's
so
what it says.
from the vine, what would you say if it's 4 to 8 amos away, then it's considered a separate vine, right? And so in other words, it's a vineyard because it's considered a separate vine. So with the trees, it would also be considered a separate tree if it's 4 to 8 amos away.
But then it's combined as part of that
No, so the
field.
question is a separate tree, right? With the tree, the question is, well, in both cases, the question is it a separate tree or a separate vine? But the consequences are a little bit different. In the case of the vineyard, if it's a separate vine, then that expands the area of the vineyard. In other words, you've got a new vine over here, so that means it combines its space with the original space as part of the vineyard, right? Whereas with the tree, if you consider it a separate tree, then if it's 4 to 8 amos away, then the land under it in the sale becomes part of the sale. So
they're
it's
both
essentially the
really
same.
essentially the same. They are combined.
Yeah,
So
that's right. By Rosh Papa. Papa asks, what if you sell 2 trees in your field, and the third tree, you're selling 3 trees, 2 of them are within, your field. The third one's growing on the boundary. So remember, we've talked about like if you have a little bit of a raised pile of dirt to mark the boundary, right? So this third tree is planted on that raised area. Now, is that considered like on the same field? And so that you would include the land under it. And also, what if you have a field and then you have purchased a tree in your neighbor's field, okay? and presumably the land underneath it. And then you come to me and you say, I want to sell you these three trees. Two of them are in my field, and the third one is the one I own in my neighbor's field, and they're contiguous. Okay. So do we still say that I'm selling you the land underneath it? Or no, do we say that unless, I mean, look, you could do it explicitly, right? Any of these things, if you say explicitly you are or you aren't selling, then that's the deal. But the question is, if you don't specify, if you say I'm selling you these three trees, one of them is in a different plot of land, then do we still say that you're selling the land in between them? What about that? Take it. So we don't answer the question. We'll leave it an open question.
Well, why not just say that we use the rule of 4 to 8 or 8 to 16 and say if that
Well,
tree
because here
is
there's a different situation. Like the question is always, what is the intention? What's the intention of the parties, right? If they, as I said, if they specify exactly, I'm selling these three trees with the land, or they specify without the land, and that's, then it's clear. The question is, if you don't mention it, right? You're saying I'm selling you these three trees, is the common understanding that includes the land. So maybe it's different if it's all within one plot of land, or if one of the trees is in a different plot of land, even if it's contiguous, maybe it's a different rule, right? Maybe the common understanding of selling three trees would change if one of them is in a different plot. Does that make sense?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore you don't know that you
Right. You
may
don't know
not
what
be
is meant.
acquiring your neighbor, you may not be allowed to acquire your neighbor's yard. If
Well,
it's
no,
in
that's
his
not really
yard,
the
I mean, and you
question.
want the land underneath it,
No, that's
well,
not
that's
really the
part of the
question
question, right?
because no, because certainly if you're selling something that's not yours, that's not going to be effective. Right? It has to be where you have already purchased from your neighbor this third tree and the land underneath it, right? And now, the question is that included in the sale you do to the third party? Make sense?
Well, now you phrase it, I'm not sure because if you bought this land,
Yeah,
this property from the neighbor, the trees,
right.
and he's selling you the tree. Well, he's selling you two trees in this parcel land and one tree in
Mm-hmm.
another parcel land.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if oh, you're right. So maybe the land isn't included, even if it's within within
Right.
the 8 to
Even if
16 or 4 to
that's
8.
right.
It
Right.
may not be included because it's actually across the border, but he's
Yeah.
agreed
So
to
the
sell
question,
you.
no, but remember, we're just trying to interpret an unclear statement, right? The statement is, I'm selling you these three trees. There's no question that the trees are sold, right? But the question is, did I mean to say and the land underneath them, right? Is that the common understanding of selling these three trees? So we have determined when they're all in one plot of land, yes, as long as they're within the right, dimensions, 4 to 8 or 8 to 16 or 4 to 16, whatever it is,
Right,
right?
right.
Okay, but does that still apply when the trees are still within 4 to 16 amos, let's say? Okay, but one of them is in a different plot. Okay, a different plot of land. Even though I own them, right? And even though I have the right to sell them, and even though they're within the same dimensions, the same distance from each other, but the fact that they're understood to be in two different plots of land, do I still mean to sell them with the land or not? That's the question.
Yeah, I hear the question, but so he's divided his land into separate plots for whatever reason. This is
Mhm.
this plot, that spot.
Right. Or that's the common understanding. It's like, you can see that this is what there's some indication, there's some um, understanding that these are two different plots of land. Now
Hmm.
I could sell to you, like if I drew up the contract and said I'm selling you the two trees from this side and the one tree from that side and the land between them, that's a valid sale, right? But if I don't specify and the land between them, is that the common understanding or not?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Vairavashi, another question. Bor Moshe Tafsik. What if there's a cistern in between? Okay, so we've assumed that there's just land in between these trees. What if there's something that is in the middle? right? Some cistern or something significant. Um, and what about Amos Hamayim Moshe Tafsik? What about an aqueduct? Rishus Harabim now, or if there's what if there's like a Rishus Harabim, there's a public road in between them. Does that interrupt it for our purposes? Richba diklema. What if it's a hedge? So we don't know. We're not answering those questions either, right? So the windup is the best thing is if you're doing a real estate transaction, specify what you mean, and then you won't get into these questions, right? Bamine kilo me Rabbi. Hillel asked Rabbi, Allah eras benam. Okay, what happens if there's a cedar tree? Let's say you're selling fruit trees, right? Apple trees. Um, and um, and there's a cedar tree in between them, right? So does that mean that they're not three consecutive trees? Or do we still say they're three consecutive apple trees? It doesn't matter.
No,
There's a
but the
cedar tree in
Rashbam
between them.
says that the cedar tree, la'achar mechira, that after he sold the tree, then a cedar tree grew up.
Yeah, you could interpret it that way also. That's what Rashbam says. Yeah. But then, like, why would you think not? Um, oh no, that's what the Gemara asks. So yeah, stick with me here with the Gemara. Allah, so the Gemara says, is he asking about when the tree grew there afterwards? Right? If something grew there, if we agree that I bought the three apple trees and the land between them, and I own that land, and then the cedar tree grows there. Of course, I own the cedar tree, right? Ella must be Haya Eresmene. Yeah, we have to read the question as if there was already a cedar tree there, right? So yeah, Rashbam is correct. That's the original understanding of it grew there, but then we decide no, that can't be the question because that answer is obvious. Amalei, so the answer is kind of course, yeah. It's like it's definitely included. A tree does not block does not make an interruption. Now, next question. How are these trees arranged? Rav Amar Kashura. Rav says what we're talking about is trees like one after another, right in a straight line. Shmuel Amar Kachatsupa. Shmuel says it's more like a triangle. Okay. Mandi Amar Kashura, if according to Rav, who says they're like if they're this far apart in a row, then Koshikin Hatsuba, so they're even closer, they're in a triangle. It certainly means to include the land between them because the way the trees are arranged, they almost kind of form a border, right? A group. Avokashura, Umandi Amakatsuba, Shmuel, who says that we're only talking, the mission is only talking about a triangle, but Avokashura, but if they're arranged as in a row, then the mission doesn't even apply. By Tama, why? We should Demizdera the entire because it's if the trees are in a row, right? If there's one tree and then 8 amos of land, and then another tree, another 8 amos of land, then you could see where I would mean to sell the tree, but I want to keep the land in between them. I want to plant my wheat there, right? It would be easy to do so if the trees are in a row. But if they're in a triangle, it's a little more complicated. Where exactly you're going to plant and how's the row going to go, etc. So I understand. So if you say that the Mishnah is talking about a triangle, but if they're arranged in a row, the Mishnah would not apply because we could assume that the seller wants to keep the land in between because he can use it for planting. Asking for Ramnuna, sure, Ramnuna asked, Monday or Hatsuva, according to Shmuel says, the Mishnah is talking about a triangle, my Tama, one is rubbing out because you can't plant in between them easily. On the outcome, but Zabin Latzlas Hige Romaisa. If you sold him 3 big bushes, well, Mizbi rubbing tire, you can't plant between them. Right? So if like we're imagining trees where the land in between the trees is clear. But what if it's the kind of a bush that it's like it grows out? It's like it's hard to pass between the trees because of the nature of how it grows. So, so does that mean that with these kind of bushy trees that you don't get the land in between? No, That's not significant, right? These bushes. Hana Chashiva, the trees, they're more significant. So, he's saying when you sell bushes, you don't even, there's no havamina that you get the land around them, right? Because you're just selling the bushes, right? When you sell a tree, that's more like a feature of the landscape that might more reasonably include the land around. Okay.
So
Okay, next.
the
Yeah,
seller, just clarify this, the seller
yeah.
wants to sell trees in a triangle and not in a row because the land can't be can't be
What we're saying
sold.
is, what's the case of the Mishnah? When we're talking about a guy who sells trees, does he include the land? Does that apply to a case where they're arranged in a triangle or a case where they're arranged in a row? The one view is that it even applies to a case where they're arranged in a row. If I sell the 3 trees in a row, I mean to sell the land. And if if there's a case with a triangle, then certainly I would say I'm selling the land. That's Rav's view. Okay. Shmuel's view is a Mishnah is talking about where the trees are arranged in a triangle, right? That's when you say the land is included. But if the trees were arranged in a row, the Mishnah would not apply. I would not say that this Mishnah is not talking about that. And if the trees are arranged in a row, according to Shmuel, the land would not necessarily be included with the sale of the trees in a row.
Because the owner wants the land, he doesn't
Because
want
you
the
could
person to
assume
sow in between.
because you could assume that if I'm selling you these 3 trees, okay, I don't want the trees. I'm not an apple farmer. I'm a wheat farmer, right? I don't care about the trees. I'm happy to sell them to you, and you go ahead and do what you want with the apples. But that doesn't mean that I want to sell you the land because I'm a wheat farmer. I still want that land. We can assume, unless I've said again, if I say specifically I'm selling you the trees and the land, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where we just specified the trees. Does that include the land? And if I'm a wheat farmer and there's space between the trees, we can assume that I did not mean to sell you the land because a wheat farmer would want to keep the land to plant his wheat.
But haven't we said that if he sells 3 trees, the Mishnah said that
Mm-hmm.
the person acquires the land around the trees, right? Isn't that what the Mishnah
Right.
wanted to
So
know?
so according to
Once he
Shmuel,
sells,
according
yeah.
to Shmuel, the Mishnah is only talking about when they're arranged in a triangle, and there's no easy way for me to plant my wheat around them. So then, if I sell you the trees, we assume that I'm selling you the land also, because what am I going to do with that land, right? But according to Shmuel, if the trees are arranged in a row, the Mishnah is not talking about that. The
Uh-huh.
Mishnah would not say that I'm agreeing to sell you the land because I'm a wheat
Okay.
farmer and I want that land, right?
Okay.
We can assume that I still want that land. Okay, next Mishnah, different topic. Hamocha rosh behemoth gasa. If you sell the head of, the difference between a behemoth gasa is a large animal, like let's say a cow, and behemoth daka is a smaller animal, like let's say a sheep. Okay, so if I sell you the head of the cow, lo that does not include the legs. Machar zereglayim, lo machar zerosh. And if I sell you the legs of the cow, then that does not necessarily include the head. Machar zakana, if I sell you the lungs, lo machar zakabed, that doesn't include the liver. Machar zakabed, lo machar zakana. If I sell you the liver, it doesn't include the lungs. Aval badaka, that's with the cow, but with the sheep. Machar zarosh, machar zereglayim. If I sell you the head, I mean to include the legs. The legs aren't so significant that you would think of them as a separate thing. If I sell you the head of the sheep, then we understand that to mean the whole sheep, including the legs. But if I only sell you the legs, um, if I also say the leg, if I sell you the legs, that does not include the head. And if I sell you the lungs, that includes the liver. It means like all the organs. I don't mean just the lungs. With the sheep, I mean all of the internal organs. But if I sell the liver, that does not include the lungs. So we'll explain all of these things. But basically, the idea is, what's considered significant and what's considered by itself, and what's considered like goes along with the other.
I
Okay.
think Kana is actually
Mhm.
the trachea. That's what we learned in medical school. Whereas
Yes,
the lungs would be rheot, the
that's
rhea.
true. That's true. I'm explaining this according to like what Mom says. Um, Hakana, Hihareya, V'nikras Hashem Kana Shala. So it can't. The response is like it can't mean the trachea, right? Who would sell a trachea? Like that's not significant at all. When you say the trachea, you mean the lungs. Okay, it's a little, strange that the Mishnah would use that language, but that it's easier to understand it if that's what it means. So yeah, you're correct. Linguistically, it means the trachea, but we're understanding here doesn't mean that it's referring to the lungs. Now, next thing, which is another completely different topic, Arba Midos B'Machal. There's four rules about selling, and here we're going to be talking about not right, about cheating, right, or about not cheating, overcharging. Um, so So we know that in general, there's a limit in how much you're allowed to profit in the sale. You can't sell for more than the sixth from its actual value, right? If you do so, then that's called onah. So machar lo chitin yafos. What if I sell you high quality wheat, or I say I'm selling you this wheat, and I'm contending it's very high quality. And in two rows, it turns out it's crappy wheat. It's not very good. The buyer can cancel the sale. So it's like this again. If the value is more than the sixth different than it's purported to be, then the buyer can cancel the sale. Rows for What if I say I'm selling you, bad wheat, and it turns out it's much more valuable. Then the seller can change his mind, can cancel the sale. Rose into rose, Yafos into Yafos. But if it's actually what you said, when everybody, I say it's inferior wheat or superior wheat, and then there's no, obviously there's no changing, um, no changing. Like, what are we talking about? Of course, like the question is, what if the price changed, right? If the price suddenly went up or down, you can't use that as an excuse to say, "Oh, this is not what I wanted to buy." Right? This is what you wanted to buy. The price went up or down. That's not the fault of the other party. Uh, what if you're selling red wheat and it turns out to be white wheat? Or you're selling white wheat and it turns out to be red wheat. So these are like two different varieties of wheat. Or or if you're selling olive wood that turns out to be sycamore wood, or you're selling purportedly sycamore wood that turns out to be olive wood. So you're selling wine that turns out to be vinegar, or vice versa. Then either one can change, can cancel the sale, right? Because as Laura will say, it's like I really wanted vinegar and it turned out to be wine. It's like, sure, wine is more valuable than vinegar or different than vinegar, but the point is that's not what I wanted to buy. Yeah, you represented something other than you sold me. And I guess we'll pick up with the Gemara tomorrow. Yeah.
What is this mission doing here? We had a whole session on Ona in Bava Metzia, right? So
Mhm.
why? And I thought we discussed a lot of these things. Why is it? What is this mission doing here?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of related in the sense of what is intended by the sale. A little weak. I don't really have a good answer for the question, but it would be some kind of approach like that. Like, yeah, what's intended in the sale, right? I intended to buy vinegar, and it turns out to be wine. It's the best answer I can give you. Okay, so we'll pick it up here tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.